My last normal day began with a Slurpee and a best friend. It ended with his pointed finger, and a lie that erased my entire life. The last normal day of my life started with a Slurpee. It was electric blue, tasted like sugar and chemicals, and was so cold it made the bones behind my eyes ache. Sam, my best friend since kindergarten, had the cherry red one. We were sitting on the curb outside the 7-Eleven, our sneakers kicking at the loose gravel on the sticky asphalt, just talking about nothing. We were 15, and our entire universe was contained in that small town, in the space between school, our homes, and this convenience store. For us, that was enough. Our big dream was to create a comic book. I was the artist, he was the writer. My sketchbook was full of his characters, heroes born from our shared imagination. That afternoon, we were sketching out a new villain, a shadowy figure called the Eraser. Sam was describing his backstory, getting all animated, his hands flying everywhere as he talked. I was trying to capture the manic energy in his eyes onto the page. We were in our own world, a bubble of cheap snacks and big dreams. I wish, more than anything, that we could have stayed in that bubble forever. But bubbles pop. The shadow fell over us first. Long, distorted, cast by the setting sun behind two figures who had just walked out of the store. I didn't even have to look up to know who they were. You could feel the air change when they were around, get thicker, heavier. They were older, maybe 17 or 18, cousins who shared the same vacant, angry eyes and a reputation for finding trouble where there was none. "Look what we got here," one of them sneered. His voice was like gravel grinding together. Little Rainbow Bright and his shadow. I kept my head down, focusing on the lines of my drawing, my pencil suddenly feeling heavy in my hand. My mom had always told me, don't engage, don't make eye contact, just be invisible. When you're the only black kid in a friend group, in most of your classes, invisibility becomes a superpower you try to master. But Sam didn't know how to be invisible. He was all bright colors, inside and out. He was wearing a ridiculously vibrant tie-dye hoodie that day. He looked up, a confused smile on his face. "What's up, guys?" The second cousin laughed, a short, ugly bark. "What's up? Your boyfriend here is quiet. Cat got your tongue?" He nudged me with the toe of his boot. Not hard, just enough to be a violation. My jaw tightened. I still didn't look up. "We're just hanging out," I mumbled to my sketchbook. "He speaks," the first one said, feigning surprise. He took a step closer, towering over me. "We were just wondering why a kid like Sam is hanging out with your kind." The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp. My kind. It wasn't the first time I'd heard something like that, but it never got easier. It was a poison dart, and it always found its mark. I could feel the heat rise in my cheeks, a mix of shame and a deep, simmering anger. Sam finally got it. His friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a defensive scowl. "Hey, leave him alone. He's my friend." "Your friend?" The second cousin took a drag from a cigarette and blew the smoke down at us. "You need better friends, pretty boy. Ones that match." That was it for Sam. He scrambled to his feet, knocking his Slurpee over. A river of sticky red liquid bled into the gray concrete. "You got a problem?" he said, his voice a little shaky but full of conviction. He was standing up for me. He always did. That's who Sam was, loyal to a fault. And that's when it all went wrong. The first cousin shoved Sam hard. Sam stumbled backward, tripping over the curb and landing flat on his back with a pained grunt. My bubble didn't just pop. It exploded. Something inside me snapped. All the advice about being invisible, about walking away, it just evaporated. All I saw was my friend on the ground, and these two monsters laughing over him. I was on my feet before I even knew what I was doing, my sketchbook forgotten on the pavement. "Get away from him," I yelled, my voice cracking. They turned their attention to me, a slow predatory pivot. The first cousin smiled, a truly awful sight. "Oh, the shadow wants to fight, does it?" I didn't want to fight. I was a kid who drew comics. I wasn't a fighter, but I put myself between them and Sam, my skinny arms outstretched. "Just leave us alone." The shove that came next was nothing like the one they gave Sam. It was brutal, sending me staggering back against the brick wall of the 7-Eleven. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and my head cracked against the hard surface. For a second, the world went blurry. Then came the first punch. It caught me on the cheek, a starburst of pain that made my eyes water. Another one landed in my stomach, doubling me over. I heard Sam yelling my name, his voice sounding distant and panicked. I tried to swing back, a clumsy, desperate arc that connected with nothing but air. They just laughed. It became a blur of fists and feet. I curled into a ball on the ground, trying to protect my head as they kicked me. I tasted blood, coppery and metallic. I felt a sharp, cracking pain in my ribs. Each impact was a punctuation mark in their litany of slurs, each word a blow as heavy as their steel-toed boots. The world was just pain, the scrape of gravel against my skin, and their hateful laughter ringing in my ears. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. I heard the sound of tires screeching as a car pulled into the lot, followed by shouting. The weight was gone. I lay there gasping, every inch of my body screaming in agony. My vision swam. Through a haze of pain, I saw their retreating backs as they ran off into the dusk. I tried to push myself up, my arms shaking. "Sam," I choked out, my voice a raw whisper. "You okay?" I could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder. Flashing lights began to paint the scene in strobes of red and blue. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, trying to find my friend. I saw him. He was standing by the car that had pulled in, talking to a man who was on the phone. A paramedic was already running towards us. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me pass out. He was safe. It was worth it. I tried to give him a weak smile to let him know I was okay. But Sam wasn't looking at me with relief. His face was pale, his eyes wide with something I couldn't understand. Fear? Shock? The paramedic knelt beside me, her voice a soothing but distant drone. I ignored her, my eyes locked on Sam. He was saying something to the man, his voice urgent. And then he did something that shattered what was left of my world. He lifted a trembling hand. He pointed, not at the empty street where they had run. He pointed right at me. My brain couldn't make sense of it. The pain, the sirens, the flashing lights, it all created a disorienting soup of chaos, and Sam's outstretched finger was the only solid thing in it. It was like a scene from a nightmare, where logic unravels, and the people you trust most turn into monsters. A police officer, his face grim and set, walked towards us. He knelt briefly by me, not to check on me, but to get a better look, the way you'd examine a piece of evidence. Then he stood up and walked over to Sam. "He started it," Sam repeated, his voice stronger now, more practiced. He got angry. He tried to take their wallets." The words hit me harder than any of the punches. Take their wallets? My mind reeled. We were drawing comics. We were talking about a villain named The Eraser. Now, in a horrifying twist, I had become the villain, and Sam was erasing our entire friendship, our entire history, with a few cowardly words. I tried to sit up, a raw, desperate sound tearing from my throat. "Sam, what are you saying?" "No, they jumped us." The paramedic gently pushed me back down. "Easy now, son. Let's not make it worse." The officer shot me a warning look, his hand resting on his belt. "Just stay put and be quiet." His eyes weren't looking at a victim. They were looking at a problem to be managed. He turned back to Sam, his voice softer, more patient. "And these other two boys? The ones who ran off?" They were just trying to help me," Sam stammered. "They were breaking it up." Breaking it up. The phrase echoed in the ringing of my ears. Breaking my ribs, breaking the skin over my eye, breaking my faith in everything I thought I knew. I was loaded onto a gurney, the world tilting sideways. As they wheeled me towards the ambulance, my gaze was locked on Sam. He refused to meet my eyes. He just stood there, a small, pathetic figure bathed in the swirling red and blue lights. His cherry Slurpee a bloody stain on the pavement next to my forgotten sketchbook. The hospital was cold and impersonal. They stitched the gash above my eye with detached efficiency. The needle pricking my skin a minor annoyance compared to the searing betrayal in my chest. They wrapped my bruised ribs, each touch sending a jolt of pain through me. and through it all, a cop stood guard at the door of my little curtained-off cubicle. He wasn't there for my protection. I knew with a sickening certainty that he was there to make sure I didn't leave. My mom arrived like a hurricane. 1 minute, the emergency room was a steady hum of beeps and quiet conversations. The next, she was there, her eyes wide with terror as she took in my swollen face. The terror quickly morphed into a cold, hard rage when she saw the officer. "What happened?" she demanded, her voice shaking but firm, directed at the cop. "My son was assaulted. Who did this?" The officer was unmoved. "Ma'am, your son was involved in an altercation. We're still getting the details." "An altercation?" She gestured wildly at my face. "Does this look like an altercation to you? He was beaten. Where are the animals who did this?" "We have witness statements, ma'am," the officer said, his tone infuriatingly calm. "Right now, it's not as clear-cut as you think." Witness statements. He meant Sam. I tried to speak, to tell my mom what happened, to scream that Sam was lying, but my throat was tight with a pain that had nothing to do with my injuries. The words wouldn't come out. How do you tell your mom that your best friend, the boy she treated like a second son, just fed you to the wolves to save himself? After I was discharged from the hospital's care, I wasn't allowed to go home with my mom. Instead, I was escorted to a police car. The ride to the station was silent. My reflection in the window was a stranger, a bruised, broken-looking kid with haunted eyes. At the station, they put me in a small, gray room. It smelled like bleach and despair. My mom was in the hallway, her voice rising and falling as she argued with someone I couldn't see. Finally, the same officer from the 7-Eleven came in and sat down across from me. He pushed a piece of paper across the metal table. His expression was flat, bored, as if this was just another piece of paperwork in a long, tedious night. "We've taken the statements," he said, his voice a low drone, "from the witness, Samuel Miller, and the 2 young men he identified who were trying to de-escalate the situation." De-escalate. The word was so absurd I almost laughed. "So," he continued, leaning forward slightly, "this is the deal. You admit you were the aggressor, that you attempted to rob those boys, and maybe we can get you a juvenile program. You fight this, and with their testimony against yours, well, it won't go well for you." My head was spinning. This couldn't be real. "They're the ones who attacked me," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "They beat me because I'm black. Sam saw everything." The officer sighed, a long, weary sound, as if I was a particularly stupid child he was forced to deal with. He shook his head slowly. "Son, I'm going to give you some free advice. The story where the black kid starts the trouble is just easier for people to believe. It's a cleaner narrative." He stood up to leave, pausing at the door. He looked back at me, not with malice, but with a chilling kind of pity. "By the way," he said, his hand on the doorknob, "your friend, Sam, his father is a partner at the biggest law firm in the county. He came down to the station personally. He said he's going to make sure his son gets all the support he needs to get over this traumatic assault." He let the words hang in the air for a moment. "And he's going to make sure the person responsible pays for it." The world tilted on its axis and never quite righted itself again. My mom fought like a lioness, of course. She hired a lawyer we couldn't afford, a weary public defender who looked at me with the same exhausted pity as the cop. The system, it turned out, was a well-oiled machine. It took Sam's story, polished it up, and stamped it as official. The story of the bright, all-American boy and his 2 brave friends who were accosted by a violent, unpredictable black kid. My record was clean. I had good grades. I drew comics in my spare time. None of it mattered. As the cop said, their story was just cleaner. I took the deal. A plea bargain. Admitting guilt to a lesser charge of assault to avoid an attempted robbery felony that could have followed me for the rest of my life. It felt like swallowing poison. My mom cried in the courtroom, silent tears that broke my heart more than any blow ever could. Sam wasn't there. Neither were his parents. They didn't have to be. Their influence was a ghost in the room, whispering in the judge's ear. The sentence was 6 months in a juvenile detention center. 6 months. It sounded like a lifetime. The metal door clanged shut behind me, and the last remnants of my childhood evaporated. I was no longer the kid who drew superheroes. I was inmate number 734. The other kids in juvie weren't like me. They were harder, their eyes holding stories I couldn't even imagine. They saw the softness in me, the middle-class kid who'd never been in a real fight until the one that landed him here. I became a target. Invisibility was no longer a superpower. It was a survival necessity. I kept my head down. I didn't make eye contact. I spoke only when spoken to. I drew. Not superheroes anymore. I drew angry, jagged lines, dark figures with hollow eyes. I drew the faces of the two cousins, over and over, until the lead of my pencil tore through the cheap paper. And I drew Sam's face, not as my friend, but as the eraser, the villain we had created, his features twisted into a mask of betrayal. Those 6 months carved me into someone new. The fear I lived with every day hardened into a shell. The simmering anger I'd felt outside the 7-Eleven cooled into a solid, heavy core of ice in my gut. I learned to watch people, to read their intentions in the flicker of their eyes or the set of their jaw. I learned that the world wasn't divided into good guys and bad guys, but into predators and prey. And I swore to myself, in the silence of my tiny cell, that I would never be prey again. The day I got out, the sky seemed too big, the colors too bright. My mom hugged me so tight I could feel the tremor in her hands. We didn't talk much on the drive home. There was too much to say, and no words felt adequate. My old bedroom felt like a museum exhibit of a boy I no longer knew. The superhero posters on the wall seemed naive, the comic books childish. My sketchbook from that day was on my desk, a smudge of dried Slurpee on the cover. I flipped it open. The last drawing I ever did of one of our heroes was staring up at me, half finished. I closed it and put it in a box at the back of my closet. School was impossible. The whispers followed me down the hallways. That's him. The kid who tried to rob those guys. He beat up Sam Miller. The story had grown, twisted into a local legend. Sam had transferred to a private academy across the county. He was gone, his escape clean. I was left to walk through the wreckage he'd created. I saw it in the teacher's eyes, a new wariness, a hesitation. I saw it in my old friends, who now gave me a wide berth. I was mocked. I dropped out. I couldn't stand the looks, the feeling of being judged by people who knew nothing but a lie. I got a GED and started working, manual labor jobs, anything that would keep my hands busy and my mind numb. I started going to a gym, a gritty old-school place that smelled of rust and sweat. I poured all my rage, all my frustration into lifting weights. The burn in my muscles was a welcome distraction from the ache in my soul. I grew. The skinny kid who drew comics disappeared, replaced by a young man with broad shoulders and a permanent scowl. The shell I'd grown in juvie became my skin. Years passed. I didn't see or hear from Sam. He was just a ghost, a phantom limb that still ached when the weather changed. I was 25, working as a bouncer at a downtown bar. It was a good job for me. I was big, I was intimidating, and I had a finely tuned instinct for trouble. I didn't have to talk much, and most people were too scared to try and talk to me. It was a lonely existence, but it was a quiet one. I had accepted my new life, this new version of myself. I thought I had buried the past, but the past never stays buried. One Friday night, a group of guys in expensive suits came into the bar, celebrating some kind of business deal. They were loud, arrogant, and already half drunk. I was watching them from my post by the door, my usual detached vigilance, and then I saw him. He was older, his face fuller, his hair styled by someone who charged a lot of money. But it was him. The way he laughed, the way his hands flew when he talked. It was Sam. A cold wave washed over me, so intense it felt like drowning. 10 years. 10 years of my life, fundamentally altered, derailed, and shattered by the person standing 20 feet away from me, laughing without a care in the world. He hadn't even seen me. To him I was just part of the scenery, part of the background. I was just the shadow. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, my knuckles white. He was about to walk right past me. He was going to leave the bar, get into a fancy car, and drive back to a life that I was supposed to have shared with him. And he wasn't even going to know I was there. I couldn't let that happen. I had to do something. I had to say something. After a decade of silence, he was going to hear my voice. He was going to look me in the eye. As he and his friends made their way to the exit, I stepped forward, blocking their path. The laughter died on his lips as his eyes finally focused on my face, a flicker of confusion, then dawning, horrified recognition. "Excuse me," he said, his voice laced with an unearned confidence. "You're in our way." I didn't move. I just stood there, a mountain he couldn't go around. The air in the entryway crackled, the din of the bar fading into a dull roar behind us. His friends, sensing the shift in atmosphere, stopped laughing and looked between us, their drunken good humor evaporating. "I don't think so," I said. My voice came out low and steady, a gravelly rumble that didn't sound like the boy he once knew. It was the voice I'd found in the dark. Sam's face went pale. The name was on his lips, I could see it, but he couldn't force it out. It was like he was seeing a ghost. Maybe he was. The ghost of the friend he'd sacrificed. "Do we have a problem here?" one of his friends asked, puffing out his chest. He was trying to sound tough, but his eyes were nervous. I didn't take my eyes off Sam. "You remember me, don't you, Sam?" He flinched at his name. He gave a weak, almost imperceptible nod, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I remember you," I continued, the words coming out colder than I intended. "I remember a curb outside a 7-Eleven. I remember the taste of blood, and I remember you pointing your finger." Sam visibly shrank. The confident lawyer in the expensive suit vanished, and for a split second, I saw the terrified 15-year-old kid again. "Look, I was a kid," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "I was scared. They threatened my family." The excuse was so pathetic, so transparently false, that it didn't even spark anger. It just landed with a dull, hollow thud. "They threatened you, or your dad's reputation." I took a half step closer, and his whole group recoiled. "You had a choice, Sam. You could have told the truth, but you chose the easy way out. You chose to erase me." His eyes were glassy with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "You don't know how sorry I am. I've lived with it every single day." I wanted to believe him. A part of me, the phantom limb of the 15-year-old boy I used to be, desperately wanted to hear that he'd been tormented by his betrayal. But as I looked at him, at his tailored suit, his expensive watch, his easy confidence that had only faltered when confronted by his past, I knew it was another lie. He hadn't lived with it. He had buried it. He had moved on and built a perfect life on top of the ruins of mine. The sorrow in his eyes wasn't for me. It was for himself, for being caught. "Sorry doesn't give me back 10 years, Sam," I said, my voice flat. "It doesn't undo juvie. It doesn't fix what you broke, not just in me, but in my mom. Do you have any idea what this did to her?" That seemed to land. A genuine flicker of shame crossed his face. He opened his mouth to say something, but I held up a hand. "I'm not going to hit you," I said, and the relief that washed over his face was disgusting. "That's what you expect, isn't it? That's the role you cast me in, the violent thug. But I'm not him. You and those 2 cousins, and your father, you tried to make me into a monster, but you failed." I stepped back, clearing the path to the door. "Get out." His friends practically dragged him out into the night. He glanced back once, his face a mess of confusion and shame, before the door swung shut behind them. For a long moment I just stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had waited 10 years for that confrontation. I'd played it out in my head 1,000 times, in 1,000 different ways, most of them ending in violence. But in the end, seeing him, small and pathetic and cowardly, was enough. The rage that had been a furnace inside me for a decade had cooled, leaving not peace, but a quiet emptiness. The next day something shifted. I woke up, and the weight in my chest was a little lighter. I went to the gym, but for the first time it wasn't about anger. It was just about the movement, the strength. That evening, I pulled the box out from the back of my closet. I took out the old sketchbook. I looked at the drawing of the half-finished superhero, a relic from another lifetime. Then I took out a fresh sheet of paper and a pencil. My hand was clumsy at first, the muscles stiff from years of disuse, but slowly the lines began to flow. I didn't draw a superhero. I drew a man standing in a doorway, with a shadow stretching out behind him. The man's face was scarred, but his eyes were clear. He wasn't a monster or a victim. He was just a survivor. A few weeks later, a thick envelope arrived at my mom's house, where I was still living. It was from a top law firm in the city, the one where Sam was a junior partner. Inside was a cashier's check for a staggering amount of money, enough to change a life, and a short typed letter. It was a formal apology for the events of 10 years ago, a settlement offer for the damages, both physical and emotional. There was no signature, no personal touch. It was cold, corporate, and clean. It was hush money, an attempt to buy his way back to a clear conscience. I looked at the check, at all those zeros. It could have bought me a new life. A car, an apartment, freedom from the daily grind. My mom looked at it, her eyes filled with a decade of pain. "It's blood money," she said quietly. And she was right. I took the check and the letter and I tore them into tiny pieces. I let them fall into the trash can like confetti. That night I started drawing again, in earnest. I drew my story. Not the lie they had told, but the truth. I drew 2 boys and a Slurpee. I drew a shadow falling over them. I drew the fists and the hatred, the flashing lights and the pointing finger. I drew the cold gray walls of a cell and the slow, arduous process of building a man out of the broken pieces of a boy. It wasn't a story about superheroes and villains anymore. It was just a human story. My story. It wasn't the life I had dreamed of, sitting on that curb. But for the first time in 10 years, it felt like it was finally mine.